What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Action Network podcast. I am your host, Evan Abrams, and I am joined by Action Network NFL expert Chris Raybon to go over the most exciting NFL day in May. It's the NFL schedule release. Chris, what's going on, man? How are you? It's been a few weeks.
What's going on, Evan? I don't know. Is this the most exciting day, or is it just the next time Trey Hendrickson throws some shade at Zach Taylor? I don't know. Could be anything. Maybe Aaron Rodgers signs. I mean, who knows?
I mean, for what it's worth, we already knew the opponents. A lot of people have been talking about this, but I kind of like the schedule release. I mean, I like to see where they play. I go on a trip every year where I go to a different NFL city. So schedule release is always about the time where I'm trying to figure out where the trip's going to be. So there's a lot of fun things involved in it. But listen, at least I'm excited about it. Today we're just going to go through a bunch of different topics.
Wait.
Yeah.
You can't just throw that out there and not tell
Well,
us
which
where you're
one?
going.
We don't know yet. We don't know
The
yet.
trip.
We're working on it. We're working
Well,
on it.
let's like the number one. What are you thinking about?
I mean, my friends, I've never been to Lambeau.
Okay.
My friends really want to go to Lambeau, but I have a stipulation. I really only want to go weeks like 1 through 4. I was like, after that, I'm just not, listen, I went to Indiana. I don't want to sit there and like bundle up in the freezing cold. So I want to see Lambeau, Titletown. It's an amazing atmosphere, but I would like, a little bit cold weather, not, and if that makes me, whatever you want to call me, that it is what it is. I'll take the punishment for it. But I want to go to, I've been to a Vegas game, but we haven't been to a Vegas game as a group. But I think they're going to save that till they're a little bit better.
Yeah, I agree though. I feel like at the end of the day, when you start thinking about it, the domes stadiums are like the ones you end up wanting to go to more. But I would say Lambeau is definitely at the top of my list, and I want Chicago. I think would be interesting too.
I
I
haven't
think
done that
those.
either.
Yeah, that seems like that would probably, especially this year, it seems like a fun one.
We have done some domes though. New Orleans, Arizona. There's been a few in there. But
I
okay.
was not
Let
impressed with
yeah.
Arizona at all. Like I don't. It was so mid to me. Like I can't believe so many Super Bowls have been hosted there.
To be fair, we went to Jacksonville, so we've seen that side of it. But Arizona was a little bit better than that. The only thing good about Arizona is the spread changed on the last touchdown extra point at the game. That was missed. So one of the only things we remember. All right, but let's go into the schedule. So we're going to go into a bunch of different topics here to kind of just get our what's interesting to us, some feedback, some schedule stuff. So we're going to go through just some categories. The first thing is I just want to hear from you off the bat when the schedule came out and you were able to kind of digest the entire thing. What is the first thing you noticed or kind of looked for in your process?
I just kind of look it over, and the first thing that jumped out at me was the Pittsburgh Steelers, and how they have these presumptive Aaron Rodgers kind of rematches and just rematches in general going on there. I feel like the Steelers are always an interesting one because everybody knows about that Tomlin streak and how long he's been going with not having a losing season. So I just think it's so interesting with Rodgers not signed yet, but they already got that Jets Steelers week 1 matchup set up. And I don't know if that line is even correct. I feel like the Steelers shouldn't be such large favorites. We'll talk about that. So yeah, the Steelers in general are usually the first team I look at just because of that Tomlin streak, but especially this year, I thought it was pretty interesting.
I mean, from the Steelers schedule, you're making the assumption based off of some of the primetime games and the Jets that the NFL is taking a gamble, or maybe they know something that we don't, that he's going to be there because I couldn't see Rudolph in some of those spots. So that's definitely interesting nonetheless. I guess from my point of view, and it's been, kind of put everywhere, but the Chiefs primetime schedule, like when you just look across the board and, a lot of these schedules are color coded, Kansas City's is very colorful in the first 8 or 9 weeks. I mean, there is a lot of different places and things that they have to go through. I think, what is it, 5 primetime games, first 8 weeks, first time in NFL history. The teams had to kind of go through that. To me, the Vikings international back to back is just
Mm-hmm.
kind of intriguing and interesting. I think it could be an advantage. I believe they get the Browns on that second leg of the back to back. One interesting note, the Falcons, they're at home again. I believe it's 5 or 6 straight years now. They've played at home in week 1. Hasn't been great, but nonetheless, it's interesting that Atlanta kind of sits in that spot year to year. A lot of people have mentioned this, but Dallas's schedule in the second half really difficult, especially after the bye. It's actually pretty crazy. It's at Vegas, which, is what it is, but Philly, KC, Detroit, Minnesota, Chargers, and Washington is a brutal, brutal gauntlet kind of in a row. Plus, Dallas has 4 Thursday night football games this season, which would be the first time a team's had to do that in history, which is, I guess, an advantage and a disadvantage based off the rest after the games. The only
That's a
other
big
thing I
advantage for
saw,
the
oh yeah,
NFL, though. I mean,
yeah,
who they talk about the Cowboys have what the largest fan base in the league, so I think that's a smart move. Maybe Al Michaels is back this year, right, for
I
TNF.
think so.
So
I think so.
yeah, so maybe he'll stay awake this year. I know he really hates those bad schedules, but yeah, that's a win. That's definitely a win. But I was gonna actually mention one other one. The Cleveland Browns, they could be playing their Super Bowl in week 1. I mean, their schedule is really tough, especially before the bye. They go Tennessee at Baltimore, Green Bay at Detroit, Minnesota at Pittsburgh, Miami at New England. Coming out of the bye, they have at the Jets, and then a couple weeks later, they have at Vegas, and in between that is Baltimore, San Francisco, and then they have a Tennessee game. If the Jets, Raiders, and Titans are all better, which they very well could be with these new coaches, new quarterbacks, I mean, what games do the Browns win outside of their yearly annual upset of the Bengals, which would come in week 1?
I mean, the only thing I can say is it looks pretty normal from week to week. Like they've got a lot of 1 o'clock games. Aside from that Minnesota
Oh
game
yeah,
overseas, it is relatively like we'll play every Sunday at 1 o'clock, which I feel like from like a rhythm point of view, say Gabriel Shador, like some type of quarterback becomes a little bit better than we expected. I don't mind the schedule overall for them, which is
really.
I mean, no. From like an appointed,
Oh
from an
yeah, just from like a
view, I
spot
get it.
perspective. Yeah,
From like
yeah.
a week to week and rhythm point of view, which I honestly kind of look at a little bit. Like if we're going to knock the Chiefs for having to run all over the place, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, but like the Chargers have the most miles in terms of having to travel throughout the season. Like there's certain good and bad about each of these schedules. But I guess that's one positive thing I could say about Cleveland at this point. But what else you got? Anything else here?
Yeah, I mean the Chiefs one, going back to them, is interesting
Yeah,
because we saw a couple of years ago, I believe it was the year they played the 49ers in the Super Bowl. So 2 years ago, they had a really brutal schedule early in the year. I think they set records for like the amount of like the least amount of rest or the most games. And remember, Kelsey was kind of playing limited snaps at times. And I just think that's kind of interesting with Kelsey getting older, but at the same time, a lot of the other team is getting younger. Like you got Rice and Worthy expected to play big roles. The offensive line is getting younger. So I feel like with the Chiefs, it's almost like they just keep on chugging no matter what. But when you look at a team like the Chargers, I mean, first of all, they don't have much of a home field, so I don't think they mind the travel in that sense. But I do feel like they were one of the more injured teams, one of the most injured teams last year, and just kind
a
of
good
the
point.
the body types of the players that they have rostered. Like for example, they tend to go with some of the bigger bodied guys. They're not like a pure speed, little guy team. Like you look at the receivers, like Williams, Harris, like those are big guys. Their running backs are big. They use a fullback. So it's like that kind of team. I would look out for the travel to impact them and perhaps get worse, as we go later into the season, because I do think that when it comes to travel, like a lot of this stuff is really hard to quantify. It's probably going to have zero effect in certain cases, and it's probably going to have like a negligible in others, and it might have like a kind of an outsized effect in a couple of spots. But I think the Chargers are really at risk just based on the kind of players they tend to roster. And I'm not surprised that they were one of the more injured teams last year. And then, of course, they're at one side of the country, so you got to travel sometimes all the way to the other side. So, yeah, the Chargers, I would definitely be able to worry about.
I was going to say, when you talk about that, I mean, the reason their travel is so intense is because you have trips to Miami, you have a trip to Tennessee, you have a separate trip to Jacksonville. Like it's just you're kind of going across the country to play not the best teams in those spots. So we'll see how the impact is. I imagine they'd be favored in a bunch of those games, even with the travel. And Herbert's done a good job in his career doing that, and he's good on the road, which
I
kind of says a
mean,
little bit about
I
to
don't
his.
know. I feel like it's kind of dangerous though, because it's
It is.
like
It is.
if you're not, it's like half of the team is probably going to get way too lit in Nashville or Tennessee, and the other half of the team, whoever doesn't like that kind of partying, when they go to Miami, that half of the team is going to get way too lit. So, like, that is kind of something for everybody having to go to those two spots, man. So,
Well,
yeah.
they can rest in Jacksonville when they go on that road trip, so it's fine. All right. So next we're gonna go to. I'm just curious about your methods here a little bit, and I'll talk about some of the stuff that I've done for action. But in terms of strength of schedule, like there's a lot of methods, there's a lot of metrics. People, go as in depth as they really want to here, but just talk to me about what you do in terms of the schedule.
So, with strength of schedule, it's pretty simple to me. I'm looking at my own team ratings or just of the version that corresponds to whatever strength I'm looking for. If I'm looking for strength of defense, I look at my defensive team ratings. Like it's the same way we can kind of build these look ahead lines and projected spreads and whatnot. Now, that's what you want to be looking at for strength of schedule, because like everything else is just going to be, it's not predictive. Like you need to use the ratings and data that you intend to be predictive, because you look at, like, let's say last year's records or something like that's last year. You look at win totals, well, that's influenced by strength of schedule. So it's not a true, it's close, but it's not a true rating. So there's like all these other things that are going to have a lot of noise. So I personally use my own ratings or for whatever I'm doing, but for people out there, I would recommend kind of using whatever would be as close to predictive to whatever you're trying to find the strength for as possible. So whether it be someone else's team ratings or whatever it is for that specific metric, I think that's how you do it. I think that there's a lot of noise in all the other methods. But what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I just think there's really two sides of it here. Are you trying to do something predictive where you're basically trying to set lines, try and find edges, like trying to make bets and things of that nature? And I think doing it unit by unit is the way that I handle it. But initially, I do start with the win totals, the futures, things of that nature, which is not, like you said, it's not predictive because it's really coming from the market, which is already baking in a lot of these things. It's just more predictive than being able to do like 2024 win percentage. Like that
Oh yeah.
actually has no value and things of that nature. But I just think you can do it by rest, you can do it by season segments, which I think is interesting, like last 4 games, first 4 games, in terms of breaking down some of that information. But I think there's two sides to it. There's trying to get just an accurate strength of schedule, and then there's actually trying to create something that's a little predictive. So I think there's a little two sides of being able to create content for the strength of schedule. But nonetheless, I think it's fascinating how we've kind of developed a little bit, because 10 years ago, most people were just blindly looking at last year records and kind of accepting that information. And we've very much moved on from that, which is kind of exciting. And that kind of why I kind of like the schedule release a little bit more than maybe some people is I
Yep.
like looking at some of these week to week things. And at this point, we can also set up bet labs and start getting some of these triggers out there. So it's a fun time of year in May, but that's at least the way I look at it.
Yeah, I definitely think so. Strength of schedule is going to be, especially now that the schedule is released, it's going to be kind of a buzzword. And I do think at times it's kind of like overrated. And what I mean by that is, I agree with you. I think you kind of got to go team by team, week by week, spot by spot. And there's going to be a few spots that you kind of see that you could kind of circle, or that, maybe there's going to be like we know Mike Tomlin has all these different trends. So maybe he's going to be like on the at home as an underdog after a tough road game or something. You kind of, there's spots you could kind of circle in anticipation. I wouldn't necessarily act on them yet, but I think the reason that a lot of times people kind of overstate strength of schedule, especially at this time of year, is because number one, we know that predictively, the way NFL games and game outcomes work is the quarterback has an outsized impact, right? So a lot of strength of schedule is kind of it kind of cancels itself out. You don't know who's going to be healthy, who's going to be out, who's going to make a big jump, who's going to struggle, like all these things that you would, it kind of gets caught up in your team rating, but like looking at it this far out is not going to be that beneficial. So when I'm looking at strength of schedule, I'm generally kind of looking at it mostly from like a quarterback perspective and a team rating perspective, essentially like offense, defense, which is the quarterback is a large part of the offense, and kind of looking at it like that. Like if a team has to face a murderer's row of quarterbacks, that's or the opposite, that's when I'm really kind of raising my eyebrows, or if something related to that travel wise. That's really, I think, the key and the most actionable information, especially at this time of year, because again, we don't know the 53-man rosters, we don't know the injuries, there's a lot of things we don't know. So like you could get a little too granular sometimes with that strength of schedule, incorporating it this early, but I do think it's worth looking at it from the quarterback perspective.
I like that. And it's also, I mean, the way I look at it, it's weighted early season, right? Like you're just more, you're more going to know what's going to happen first 4 weeks, first 9 weeks than like all the injuries and the garbage that happens second half. So I tend to try to look at some of those early spots and, I at least when trying to do a full season, weight the first half more.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
definitely.
So,
That's very
yeah.
smart. Like anytime you're doing projections and when you want to incorporate something like that, you're kind of weighting towards like the more current stuff. Like when you're projecting out, especially in the NFL where it's like at interval periods, like 1 week, and it's like a week could influence the next week too. So that's just kind of how you have to do it. And there's all types of, complicated formulas we can talk about, but we don't need to do that. Let's keep moving.
Not today. All right. So let's talk about what a lot of people are probably interested right now, which is some of these betting lines, especially for week one. So I'm going to let you start here, but obviously lines are moving. Week one lines are out there. Totals are out there. So what has caught your eye in these initial spreads and games?
I mean, you know me, I'm an NFL DJ, so a lot has caught my eye. So I'll start with the first game, which is the Cowboys and the Eagles. That one, I just think the Eagles are going to be a little bit underrated offensively because you have all the talk of the tush push potentially getting banned, and I know Goddard is on the block and whatnot. But if you look at the Eagles, I think the way it's early yet, so I don't recommend locking in anything crazy. But I do think if you're kind of looking for an edge on this game, I think the Eagles offense is a little bit underrated, especially on some of their team total alt lines. Like if you create parlays and you like to anchor it with a high likelihood one that's a little juiced up, and then go with some longer shots attached to that. I do think, like, if you look back with Jalen Hurts as the starter, the Eagles have scored at least 21 points in 27 of their past 29 home games. They've scored more than 21 in all but 4 of those last 29. So you're talking about like 85-90% likelihoods. And if you look at their team totals, they're priced a lot lower than that for like over 20 and a half. So like over 20 and a half, that's pretty much been a lock at home for them in Jalen Hurts starts. Over 22 and a half, and then over 23 and a half. All of those, the Eagles have hit those pretty much every game or 90% of the time. And they're not priced like it. They're priced like about 10-15% implied probability below that. So I just think Dallas with, third defensive coordinator in 3 years. Yes, Micah should be healthier, but who knows with Eberflus? They went from top 5 in points allowed 2 years ago to 31st on defense a season ago. They're going to be relying on a lot of guys that were hurt, or their play was up and down. Got some rookies in the mix now, so just a lot of moving pieces early in this year. I think is when you would expect their defense to struggle the most. So I think this Philly offense keeps on humming. Jalen Hurts in his 4 week 1 starts, despite having, this is now his 5th coordinator he's had a different coordinator all but 1 year in the league. So pretty much every offseason except one where Steichen came back. And Jalen Hurts in week one, no ill effects. He's averaging 31 points per game in week one starts, never fewer than 25, and just always consistent. Always the overs 3-1. So I just think this Eagles team, one way or another, they're going to score points. Like, I don't know. I still got questions about the Dallas offense. So I'm not touching the full game total yet, but I've definitely kind of created some things just with the different Eagles team totals, because I do think they're underpriced. So that's just one game. So I feel like that's I got more, but I want to hear from you. What do you think about the Eagles, and what kind of caught your eye?
All right, so I agree with you. I think the focus, at least on mine, was looking at the over in that game. So I think we were
Okay.
on the same kind of wavelength in that sense. I do also see Dallas kind of falling behind in the game and potentially putting up points as well. So that's why I was kind of looking at the over. I'd actually be interested just to see what that first game of the year is kind of done from an over-under perspective. Usually the champ ends up doing pretty decently, winning, covering, going back in history. So I would be curious there, at least from like a spot point of view. And so everyone realizes this if you've been betting in the NFL a bunch of years, that like week one is just the most different market than we really see week to week the entire season, just because it moves from May to September. I mean, you have the most time for it to adjust. So as much as I want to sit here and say, like, I'm interested in the Jets, I'm interested in the Browns, but I see no reason right now to kind of invest at those numbers, because okay, like I assume Rodgers is going to find his way to Pittsburgh at some point. And when that happens, I also see the line going up. So like I don't see it necessarily going under 3 if that happens. So I'm gonna sit back and probably wait. And then from Cleveland's point of view, it's like, okay, we have no idea who's gonna start a quarterback. The line is basically sitting at 5.5, also with no idea what's gonna happen with Hendrickson on the other side. So there's just lots of pieces that we kind of don't know, which is why they're just posting stuff up there. But those are two underdogs that, if it got to 6 at some point or 6.5, I'd take a bite. But in terms of Cleveland, but those are two dogs. I mean, and the other thing, like blanketed, that people will tell you, and I will have all this information in articles and stuff leading up to the season. But like home dogs in division games early in the season, especially week one, tend to have a good value long term. It's year to year, pretty decent. Right now, I mean, other than Cleveland, it's basically all 1.5s. There's like 4 or 5 games, but they're all like 1.5 point spreads. And there's just way too much time where I think it can either flip or it can go a point or two. So I think right now I'm not rushing into things, but like off the bat, Tampa Bay is intriguing. I'm sorry, Atlanta is intriguing to me. They're getting like a point or two against Baker. Like I think there's certain situations, like I'd like Seattle against San Francisco. I'm a little down on San Francisco, and I think other people, I've even heard people from Action say they kind of want to invest in San Francisco this year, but we kind of have to wait and see. So I think those are probably the spots right off the bat that I circled and looked at. But again, 4 months ahead, we'll see.
So I got some comments on
Yeah.
those two. The first two you brought up, the Bengals and the Browns. So this, you talk about lines moving. I did get a 6 with the
Okay.
Browns, but this is the spot to bet the Browns. I don't mind investing now because all their quarterbacks, it's not like we don't know who's starting. It could be Flacco, it could be Pickett, it could be Gabriel, it could be Shador.
Let's hold on. If you like the Browns, who would you want to start? Like, who would you want to see there? Just out of curiosity.
Gabriel.
Really? That's
Yeah.
amazing. Okay,
You know
good.
why?
Continue.
Because,
Continue.
my reasoning would be, we know what Flacco is, he's old. We know what Pickett is, he sucks.
Yeah.
And clearly there's a reason Shador fell. So the guy they believe in the most is Gabriel. If Gabriel beats out those 3 other guys, that means that he is actually elevating his play to that upside point, which caused them to believe in him in the first place, which would mean, I'm getting some extra value, because right now I'm just factoring in 4 equally sucky quarterbacks, essentially. You know what I mean? So, but that's the whole thing. There's no real, a lot of times or not a lot of times, but in many cases, because many teams have kind of their franchise quarterback and then there's a drop off. It can be risky, even though quarterback injuries aren't that common, but there's not really much risk of a drop off the quarterback position with Cleveland. So I feel like it's all upside, and I just feel like the line is out of whack. Now, we already know about, you kind of alluded to, just in general, week one, divisional dogs, road, home, whatever, way undervalued. It's about 60%, actually above 60%. And then before you even start factoring in other types of spots, but Joe Burrow averages just 5.3 yards per attempt in Cleveland in his career. This Bengal team's already starting to implode with this Hendrickson situation. Joe Burrow, one game has he won in the first 2 weeks of the season in his career. He's 1-9 straight up, 3-7 against the spread. So the reason I'm investing now, and I'll invest again when we have more certainty, but is because as people start to catch on to this, the line actually could move in the opposite direction. If there's any positive buzz about any Cleveland quarterback, the line could start to move in the opposite direction again. So I feel like getting it, 5.5, 6 right now is way inflated already considering the spot.
I agree.
So I want some of that now because, like you mentioned, the market's going to move for 4 months, and that's not always just driven by, news and goings on the field or with the team. Sometimes it can be something like, the public starts to get privy to certain information, or, there's just kind of like a herd effect or something like that. So I do think it is worth kind of investing in that spot because I don't really see any downside to it. And then the Jets, to a lesser degree, I just think that line would be wrong even if Rodgers was already confirmed.
But you have to assume that if Rodgers comes in, it's going to go up.
No, I do, and then I'll invest again. But my whole thing is, I'm just looking to get value. If I can get value twice or 3 times over the course of the offseason, fine. But I already show value, even if, factoring in Rodgers with this line. So, for example, and I'm not saying Fields is the better quarterback, but what I am saying is over the last 3 years, so since 2022, which was, after Fields' rookie year in 2021, after Rodgers' last MVP in 2021, they put up pretty much identical numbers in almost every metric. Fields has the better QBR. Fields has the better yards per attempt. Rodgers has the slightly better winning percentage. Rodgers has the slightly better adjusted net. Everything is kind of neck and neck, and then Fields is younger and a better runner, and he's probably playing behind the best offensive line he's had. Rodgers, probably the best defense he's had. So it's like there's not like this big gap between the two quarterbacks, and Fields by many metrics outplayed Rodgers last year, and we just don't know what the cliff is going to be for a quarterback at Rodgers' age. Like Fields actually still has upside. I'm not saying I expect him to be drastically different than the guy we've seen in the last few years. I'm just saying there is upside just based on his age compared to Rodgers, where there's really none. So again, this is just another spot where I just see value and I don't see any downside or like at this current number. So yeah, I'm hoping it goes up more and Rodgers gets confirmed, and I'll just bet it again. But I already think the line is way out of whack. And another one I think is out of whack is the Giants, and kind of a similar situation. So they're +7, +7.5 at some spots at the Commanders. So the Giants are another team where no real quarterback downside. Like if Dart ends up winning the job, that means he's just exceeding expectations. Jameis Winston, pretty terrible, but the one spot he has been profitable is as a dog of more than a field goal, as a big dog where those pick sixes don't hurt you as much. And if it's Russell Wilson, he's competent at least, so much more competent than their entire quarterback depth chart 1, 2, 3 is better than last year. Their defense has a chance to be borderline elite. I think both the Giants and the Commanders better on paper, personnel wise, roster wise than last year. But the Giants have so much more room to go up, and they had more draft picks, more free agents, and just so much further to go up. And last year, the Giants played the Commanders very close in both divisional matchups, and that's always been the case. It's in the division. So if you look at, just like I said, divisional trends, you look at divisional dogs and you add a filter for teams that didn't make the playoffs the year before, just because like that's one of those things the public, just kind of out of sight, out of mind. We're talking about 69%. On the road, 71%. This is a 2-decade-long sample. This is going back to 2005. It just never ceases because you only get these week one matchups once a year. So yeah, people like you and I will talk about this, and still it's just the trend never kind of corrects to the point where the books actually have to start adjusting these numbers, and these trends really get a chance to reverse. Because then there's going to be all this influx of casual money ahead of week one, and whatever might be kind of done in the offseason just kind of reverts. So I think the Giants are just a great value right now because they're going to be, I think they can be a lot more competent. They got some continuity, but at the places they need continuity, and then the places they were terrible at, they got better at. So and I really don't see much downside at a touchdown to betting on them in the division. And remember, they're historically terrible at home and much, much, much better when they go on the road. So a lot of reasons about the Giants. I think, we talk about double-digit underdogs and how we don't really, or double-digit spreads and how we really don't see any this far out. I think like a spread over 6 is the new like double digits, and if you're talking about look ahead lines. So yeah, I'm looking at the Giants line, and I got to dig deeper into the Titans are the Titans are 7.5 point underdogs as well, right?
Yeah,
I gotta look at that because that might be too much too, but definitely I think the Giants, 27-22 and 21-18 with no kicker, where there are 2 games against Washington. Nine wins separated those 2 teams last year, and they still played them within 5 in both games.
Yeah, at this point, Tennessee and so Denver is the largest favorite of any week one team at the moment, -7.5 against Tennessee. Tennessee definitely intrigued me because, I mean, what Denver did as a favorite last year is just there's nuances of an anomaly, right? Like some of that stuff just shouldn't have been the case. And then one thing on the Giants is it is weird to say that if you started to make a list of like some of the more improved teams and units year to year, that a team who is like still tied for the worst odds in the NFL would be one of those teams. And it's the Giants. I mean, their roster looks better. Their defense is better. They have more options at quarterback. Like I see things that are positives there. The other one I would see positives because they had, and to me, an incredible offseason would be New England. So they were kind of intriguing to me at under 3 against the Raiders. Like, I'm not a huge fan of everything the Raiders did aside from Genty. Like overall, in terms of improvement, I see them being relatively similar, even with Geno back there. So I was tempted, let's call it, to look at New England under a field goal. Did you have any thought on that game at all?
Yeah, so this is New England is a really interesting one for me because I bet their win total. It was the first win total. I think the only win total I've bet so far. I bet it back in like before the draft even. I think we might have spoke about it maybe in like February or March, and just like right after free agency, I was like, New England's going to be a lot better. They're probably already better than the other 2 teams in that division. So like New England, but I think now we're starting to get to a point where they're becoming overvalued. So when I initially saw the opening week 1 lines or the look aheads after the schedule drop, I actually saw some 3.5s for the Raiders.
Oof.
And I was actually thinking about betting on the Raiders because you're still talking about, for New England, like, yes, we love what they did in the offseason. Long term, we think Drake May is going to be great. We love Rabel. McDaniel's back. So a lot of things to like about New England. But you're talking about week 1. This is going to be the least experience that Drake May has with what's probably going to be an entirely new receiving core because You're probably gonna have Diggs and Williams and maybe one of the guys that was there last year as the top three.
Yeah.
And gonna have some new guys on the line, new coach, new coaches all around. You're gonna have Stephon Diggs, coming off an injury. He's gonna be the least healthy. He's an important player for them. Gonna be the first game for Henderson, who's gonna be very involved. So just a lot of things where New England might not necessarily be at its best right off the bat. Meanwhile, when you look at the Raiders, you have Pete Carroll, yes, new, but again, we're just looking for value. I think they might be a little undervalued in the sense that I don't know if the ceiling is massive, especially in that division where I think they're still the worst team. But I think their floor is probably a little bit higher than people think. And they obviously are kind of aiming for a higher floor because there's no other reason to kind of hire like 70-something-year-old Pete Carroll and then mid-30s Geno Smith when you were a bad team last year. You would think you would just kind of go into like more of a full-on tank, and I feel like the Raiders are trying to be competitive. So I think the Raiders are actually going to end up being the side I bet if I end up betting a side for that game just based on the market. Like I'm not really interested in the Patriots at 2.5 or 3, but I would be interested in the Raiders over a field goal.
Yeah, I mean, the way I would play it is, and this is, it's good to have different opinions here, is New England at 2.5, which I see right now at a flat 110. I'm going to get Vegas at 3.5 by the time kickoff happens. Like,
Yeah.
there is going to be a lot of love on New England as we run up. So, I mean, from just a numbers play, if you're asking me to start putting in some prices, I just don't see it closing under that if everything kind of goes its way the next 4 months. So, in terms of like trying to predict line value, that was a little bit what I was doing. Especially, you're right, we're seeing 3.5s and even threes becoming kind of steady in the market. Anything else to you on the board here before we kind of roll on?
Let's see. So talk Cowboys. The Jaguars. That's another one I want to talk about. The Jaguars are, and this kind of also goes toward if you are looking to kind of make some season bets. So when you the way you kind of look at investing in the NFL now, whether you're straight up better or you're kind of also in fantasy or things like that, is I think because there's just so many options and so many different type of games and so many markets available. I think one of the things that you have to start doing to kind of pare down a little bit, it's not like back in the day, you only had spreads and totals and maybe some win totals and some Super Bowl. Now there's so much. We already have like full week 1 game lines and all these different things. So you kind of got to look at the outliers, right? You got to kind of look for the outliers and the situations that could be the most different from expectation. And I think the Jacksonville Jaguars are probably in the driver's seat as far as being able to be profitable in a multitude of ways for people that back them. Because if you look at this situation, so I'll just talk about it in the context of week 1, but you can kind of see how it could apply forward as well. So week 1, last season, Liam Cohen, who's now the coach. Last season, he takes over as for a new team as the offensive coordinator on the Bucs. An offense that's averaged 20.5 points per game. A quarterback, former number 1 overall pick in Mayfield, who hadn't lived up to the hype. And they were going up against the Commanders, which was a team that had a under 25 quarterback, top 2 pick, and a defense that ranked dead last the year before in points. This season, Liam Cohen, new team, Jacksonville Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence, in his career, 60 starts, I think it is. The Jaguars have averaged 20.5 points per game. He's a former number 1 overall pick, hasn't lived up to the hype. They're playing the Panthers, who finished dead last in points allowed on defense the year before. And Bryce Young is still 23. He'll turn 24 before the season, but former top 2 overall pick. And it's like the same situation. In week 1, the Bucs last year, 37 points. as a 3.5 point favorite. They won by 17. They put up 37. The Jags are 3.5 point favorites right now. And I just think that the Bucs last year for the season went from 20.5 points per game in that first year under Canales. And remember, we thought Canales was great. We were like, oh man, he's going to be great for Bryce Young, and he's a quarterback whisperer. And oh man, look how good look how much improvement Baker Mayfield showed. Team averaged 20.5 points per game on offense. Last year with Liam Cohen, they go from 20.5 to 29.5. That is just a massive increase. They were the only team that hit these 5 criteria in terms of the red zone and third down with the points scored. It's like they were a historically good offense that then went and went out and drafted us another weapon in Ibuka this year. But as far as Cohen, remember, they were trying to keep the old GM in Jacksonville, Balky. And then they had that whole weird thing with Cohen, and they decided to just say, hey, give him the keys. He didn't want Balky. He wanted his guy. They came in, pretty much turned over turned the roster upside down at almost every depth chart position on offense. And I just think that there's a non-zero chance that you could have a similar jump. Now, you can't always apply these things apples to apples. I mean, we tried to do that with Canales, with Young last year, and it didn't really pan out. I mean, Young did get a lot better, but it took, half a season for it. So it doesn't always go as expected. But when you just look at benching. Right, it took a benching. But when you just look at the situation, the potential upside, and the pieces that are in place compared to where the market is valuing Jacksonville, and it's surprising because Jacksonville is getting hype, obviously, but it's more, I think, centered around Hunter rather than the team itself. But this is a team that averaged under 20 points per game overall last year because, remember, Mac Jones had a bunch of starts. They were terrible. This team, their ceiling is something in that Tampa Bay realm. Maybe it's not 29.5, but they could get to 27. Lawrence could finally break out. Hunter and Thomas could be an all-pro combination at wide receiver. The guy Tootin at running back has a lot of upside as a rookie. And then Bigsby was a monster at times. They have a lot of guys at the skill positions. They got, the line could be decent. And then, the defense, there's a new regime. So, defense could be improved as well. Who knows? But I just think this Jacksonville team, compared to market expectation, compared to median expectation, is being severely overlooked, excuse me. I think a lot of focus is on Hunter, but it's not just Hunter. Hunter could have a regular to poor season, and this team could still be just massively exceed expectations. So I just think Jacksonville's a team that I want to invest in their team total for week 1 because they're going up against a Panthers D that worst in the league last year in points allowed. I just don't think that they're going to be, especially in week 1, that much better. Jacksonville, I think, has a chance to be that much better. We've seen that in Cohen's last stop. And then, for the season, I just think Jacksonville has that same kind of upside where I just think they could just smash everything people expected them. And Trevor Lawrence, I mean, he's the most, he's the least noticeable, number 1 quarterback, I feel like, that we have right now. He's just not really, he hasn't really exerted his will or imposed his will on the NFL on the field. But I just think things could be so different for this team this year. So that's the team I'm really watching.
I tend to agree. I mean, I think Lawrence has kind of just entered last chance corral as well. He has a little bit of a window here to show us who he is, especially getting Liam Cohen there. I will say this. So Jacksonville sitting at 2.5, it's going to 3. I even see it going to 3.5. To me, it's very similar to the New England situation. I would buy Jacksonville now, not forget everything that you just laid out simply as a line play, because I do believe the hype will move that line more than, Carolina is not getting the hype. We were talking about Carolina last year. After everything we saw in them, I don't think anyone's going to look at them or touch them until we see kind of a different result, even based off of how they finished. And the only other thing with Jacksonville, after this home game against Carolina, which they really do need to get if they want to start on the right track, their schedule after that is brutal. at Cincinnati, they've got Houston, San Francisco, Kansas City, Seattle, and the Rams, and then they get a bye. Like that is none of those teams are gimmies after Carolina. So losing week one honestly could crash their season. So to
But
me, well, yeah, go.
I have a counterpoint to that.
Yeah,
So the teams you mentioned, generally, what is the strength of each of those teams? Their offense.
offense. Yeah, correct.
Yes, right. So I think that
High scoring games.
right,
Yeah,
when I talk about investing in Jacksonville, it's not just like, again, we can go well beyond just win totals or things like that. So I just think investing in a Jacksonville offensive improvement makes a lot of sense, and that opening schedule kind of lends itself to it. But what I will say is that's also a positive for their win total, because I think as it stands now, if Jacksonville is going to make a jump, I think it's going to start with their offense. Like, I do think their defense has a lot of improvement to make as well, and I think they've kind of underachieved at most of the time over in Lawrence's career, at least. But look at Tampa Bay last year. That team, they almost ended up as like a 2 or 3 seed. Where they finished with a 4 seed because they won the
yeah, I think
division.
so.
So yeah, Jacksonville in a similarly kind of shaky division. They could win a lot of those games on pure offense. Like, if they want to get in those kind of shootouts, right? So I think, yes, of course, Jacksonville's schedule is going to be difficult because they were one of the worst teams in the league last year. So like, their schedule is always
Sure.
going to look difficult to us now. But that's my whole point. Jacksonville has so much room to grow and an actual path that there's a precedent that we've seen given the pieces that are in place. So that I just think they're a very intriguing investment to make in a lot of different ways.
Buying the Jacksonville Jaguars. All
I hate
right,
it. Yeah. Ugh, yuck.
that.
Sounds
All
dirty,
right,
but
hit it up, Chris. Talk about a little underdog here.
yeah. So you can go yard all baseball season long with underdogs, pick 'em game. Underdog is one of the leading sports app. You know that. And you can play now in your state with millions of fans who have already won billions of dollars making picks on Underdog. Are you going to be next to play? All you got to do, download the Underdog app, choose whether a player will go higher or lower in one of their stats. You can choose from things like home runs, strikeouts, total bases, all of the stats, you know them. So, once your picks feel good, and you got something locked in, you can play with it as little as $1, just $1. And if you get everything correct, you could win up to 1,000 times your money. Really love Underdog. It is a great app for so many things. I think their MLB offering is fantastic. I love their best ball for NFL as well. I think they got the best ball offering and platform. So, been kind of perfecting in my initial Underdog best ball ranks. So, really have been enjoying playing on Underdog. And for anyone that wants to experience it, you can just go and download the Underdog app, sign up with promo code Action Network to unlock a special offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you make your first deposit. Just use promo code Action Network, ACTIONNETWORK. You must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado. For some games, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms do apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY.
Yeah, I've been getting into some best ball and underdog recently, and I can't wait for your rankings and stuff like that to start trailing out. So, but let's just talk about this for a second. We're going to go into something that I think is interesting, which is kind of the early season schedule and just some things that stand out. So, I mean, just based off of, what we've seen so far, the two things that I saw were, and Raiders, we're going to talk again, but in week one, they've got Raiders at Patriots. And then week two, the Raiders are at home against the Chargers on Monday Night Football. The Chargers are off the Brazil game. So basically, take that as a negative or a positive, but it is extra rest having to play on that Friday, coming to that next game. Then week three, they're at Washington. So Washington's off a Thursday night football game before that. And then week four, they play the Bears, but the Bears ironically have a bye in week five. So they have a bye after that week four game. Basically, why I'm telling you this is it's just a bad schedule first 4 weeks for the Raiders in terms just playing teams with extra rest early in the year, which could be a disadvantage. Just interesting that I looked at. And then the other one I'll give you, and I'll get your opinion, is San Francisco. So if you just look at the list of basically plus rest days for each of their games. The 49ers are +5 in the first 9 weeks, and they're +5 without a bye week, which was basically the highest of teams without byes in those first 9 weeks. And what I thought was interesting is week 6, 7, and 8. Week 6, they play Tampa Bay. They're on a +3 rest advantage. Week 7, they play Atlanta. They're at a +1. And week 8, they play Houston. They're also at a +1. So I kind of found that a little intriguing in terms of San Francisco. Now, overall, I mentioned them before, not exactly super high on them, but that is a rest advantage that I'm kind of looking at entering that stretch for them. So we'll see how they do leading up. But before we go into some miles traveled, any thoughts on either of those two or some schedule stuff from your end?
Yeah, I think San Francisco is one of those teams when you talk about, okay, they have one of the best rest advantages. That could be very valuable for a team like San Francisco because, I mean, what's been their issue pretty much every single season of the Shanahan era? Injuries. Now, some years they overcome it and they're still an elite team and they're knocking on the door. And other years they don't even make the playoffs and they're terrible. So that kind of shows the volatility that injuries create. So when you're telling me that, okay, San Francisco might have a little bit of an edge, that's what I'm kind of talking about when I alluded to earlier. Whereas a lot of these, things that we look at, there's such minuscule edges, or they might be negligible when it's all said and done. But there's always going to be a few that have like these outsized impacts and that do kind of stick and play a role. And I think that is a prime candidate, very subtle one, but the 49ers getting some extra rest and being able to rest their guys a little bit more, especially because, they did, draft some guys a little earlier than they may have usually. And, so they're getting a little bit younger at some spots. So this could be, I know you're down on the Niners and I get it. Cause I do think in certain
the hype is crazy.
Again, it's like people go too hard with these easy schedules, especially this time of year. I get it, but there's a long way to go, and especially for a team that's always so injured. I mean, who knows? So, last year, perfect example. Arguably their best player, Christian McCaffrey. He was the fantasy RB1 like a week before the season. I was like, oh yeah, he's like questionable. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh wait, actually he's out. Like he's not playing. And then he like didn't play, played like 4 games all year or something like that. So things could change in a heartbeat for a team like San Francisco, but there is going to be it. We've seen their upside, injuries or not, and so I'm actually looking at it. Yeah, median wise, I think they are a little bit overvalued. I think Pearsall is overvalued in fantasy. I think players like Ayuk, who are coming off like a serious knee injury and might miss part of the season, I think they're always overvalued. Jennings, he was great last year, but he's only really done it for 1 year. Kittle's getting a little older. Juszczyk's getting a little older. The line defense got a lot of younger guys you're going to be relying on now. So there's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of upside with San Francisco. So that's the way I'd kind of look at them. And then, like I said, the Raiders, I just think, they're going to be a little bit more of a higher floor team than I think people will give them credit for. Like, I don't think they'll be completely terrible or like they've been at times in these past few years. So nothing much on them, but I do think the other one that when you just look at the schedule that kind of caught my attention was the New York Giants, just because you do have these three quarterbacks on the roster, Wilson, Winston, and then your first round pick, Jackson Dart. Now, you typically, when you draft a guy like Dart, what was it, 25th overall, you expect him to start for you at some point in the season, whether it's 4 games, whether it's 8 games, whether it's 10 to 12 or more. You do expect him to start games for you in year one, even if he doesn't start in week 1 for you. But this Giants team doesn't have a bye week until very late in the season. What is it? Week 14 is their bye. And it's like, okay, well, you kind of look at the bye as like a natural point where maybe you'd work the rookie in, but your bye is not until December 7th.
Yeah.
So, or December 8th. So it's 7th. So it's that week. So it's like you're going 3 straight months, and you have one of the toughest schedules in the league. Washington, at Dallas, Kansas City, the Chargers, at New Orleans, like, is an easy one, or the easiest one. Then Philly, at Denver, at Philly, San Francisco, at Chicago, Green Bay, at Detroit, at New England. They could be 1-12. They could be a good team and still be like they could be improved from last year, and their only win could be Washington, or they could be like 2-11 or something with
the only other option,
New England or something.
The only other option is week 6, they're Thursday night football against the Eagles, and then week 7 at Denver. I mean, it does give them 10 days. I don't necessarily know if you want to throw Jackson Dart on the road in Denver against that defense in the what's it called? In the elevation. I don't know if that's completely smart, but yeah, you're right. I mean, the schedule is absolutely brutal. And then even if you do use the bye, you come out of the bye against Washington and Minnesota. Not exactly 2 easy opponents, but I guess if you're 1-12 and you want to throw Dart out there, it's fine. But yeah, the Giants have it brutal.
Yeah, I think the ideal for them at this point would be if he just wins the job for week 1.
That's
because fair. We know Russell Wilson is not getting back to what he was. Now he could be more competent than if you had like a replacement level cast of characters in your quarterback room the year before, which the Giants did, which I think the Steelers did the year before they got him. So you understand his value, but he's going to be a year older. I think that there's a chance that Dart, there's a decent chance that Dart just ends up winning that week 1 job. I think with Wilson, the reason why they're so kind of outwardly or publicly, I guess I should say, committed to him is because I think he has a team and very good people working with him that kind of get these certain agreements and are very conscious of his image. Because if you remember, even last year with Pittsburgh, it was like, we were all kind of looking at it like, okay, Wilson and Fields, that's kind of, there's not that much separation just based on this stage of their careers. And then, Tomlin's all just like, no, it's Wilson's job. And then all of a sudden there's like this mysterious injury and Fields is starting the first 6 weeks. So it kind of had to be a little low key. I think you could see something like that happen here too. It's New York. It's, I'm sure Russell Wilson and his team very conscious of whatever gets reported outwardly, but behind the scenes, if Dable, Shane, decide that Jackson Dart gives him the best chance to win or that he's ready, they're gonna figure out a way to play him sooner than later. And then Winston, I mean, same thing. Like, what he is. So it's like, I don't think you're really trying to devote a bunch of snaps to Winston in the case that Wilson doesn't work out. You might as well just, you're probably going to be, you have a chance to be 2-10 or 2-11 going into the bye anyway. You might as well just lose those games with Dart. So I think that Dart is probably going to start sooner than people expect.
Yeah, those first 4 weeks at Washington, at Dallas, versus the Chiefs, versus the Chargers. Pretty brutal. All right, this is the last thing we're going to talk about here, and it's just interesting, which is total miles traveled. This tends to go around every year, and honestly, to me, the top 5 in terms of total miles traveled during the season from game to game isn't really shocking. So just to be clear, 18,000 miles is about the median. So Chargers at the top at 37,000. you're gonna see a pattern here. Rams 2, 35,000. Three are the Seahawks at 31,000, the Jaguars at 29,000, and San Francisco at 28,000. The only thing that I found interesting on those five is that Seattle is third on the list and San Francisco is fifth on the list. Both of them don't have international games. So obviously the other teams are just, boosted a little bit because of that. But really, San Francisco and, of course, Seattle, coming from the Pacific Northwest, tend to lead this category most of the time. And the same you could be said about Jacksonville. Like, if they've got to go west, it's a very long trip. Before I give the bottom five, any thoughts to those five? And just does this do anything for you? Is this something you look into?
To be frank, not really anymore, because I do think that you love to have the data, and I think this data, to have this data, a few decades ago, people, we would have killed for it. But that's when I think it was more relevant, because remember, travel has improved, so much. 100%. So a lot of the issues with miles traveled, and the reason why you could factor it in, was you have these larger than normal human beings getting cramped into these tight spaces, and like the hotels beds weren't good enough. And like I've spoken to former linemen who said as much, like, travel used to suck because beds weren't big enough and seats weren't big enough. And now there's just, everyone's wearing a microchip, and there's just been so much optimization over the past quarter century, I think, just kind of building, especially the last 10, 15 years, in terms of rest and travel and health and all that I just don't think it factors in. It's interesting to talk about. And I think there are spots where, again, like like a team like the Chargers, I do think, they're probably at a greater risk than normal. And then if a team like, on the flip side, like the Niners are getting more rest than usual, I think that could benefit them just because of how injured they've been. But generally, I do think it's really hard to quantify and do anything with it. Like, I think if you run the numbers, like, what are you going to get spread wise as far as an adjustment? Like, there's maybe coming off of a bye or something, like you might get a couple of, like, couple decimal points, but generally it's really hard to do anything with that information predictively.
Yeah, in its totality, I think it has just small values. I think it's a spot circle, which we always talk about, which is like game to game, there could be interesting things, but I think overall it's a little dormant. And just to be clear, the top five teams in terms of like least traveled, the least is the Bengals at about 8,000 miles, then the Bills at 10,000, the Ravens at 10,000, the Lions at 11,000, the Bears at 12,000. So I guess the thing you do see in those like least traveled mile teams, they're pretty damn good. Like they're actually just like between the Bengals, the Bills, the Ravens, and the Lions, feels like something. And even Chicago's got momentum this year. They all feel like probably playoff teams potentially. So I find that a little intriguing. All right. Anything else before we get out of here, Raybon?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of put a bow on the miles traveled, because this is going to be talked about by every, you're going to hear different people talk and kind of use it in different ways now that the schedule's out. But I think it's something you said earlier, is it's important to go situation by situation in certain cases. And the NFL is a unique beast in the sense that you can kind of wrap your head around and kind of lock into the specific things you're looking to, like the markets you're looking to invest in, because it's a 32 team league, but there's only 18 weeks and 17 games. And a lot of these things are very specific, and the things you might hear that get the most buzz aren't necessarily the things that are going to have any actionable impact. So, for example, we mentioned the Lions, the Bengals, some of the least traveled teams, but we know that there's specific situations that impact the Lions and the Bengals related to travel, and it really has nothing to do with distance. With the Lions, it's Jared Goff struggles in outdoors and in weather. It doesn't matter if it's far or close. It's just that the numbers say he tends to struggle more outdoors, and especially in poor weather. And with the Bengals, they just tend to struggle early in the season. They tend to struggle on their road trip to Cleveland, which is literally the closest possible road trip they could make. And, maybe it's wind related, maybe it's stadium related, maybe it's just, vibes related. But the point is, there's the NFL is so unique, I think, and we do have enough unique data that you have to kind of, or I think it is more advisable and generally optimal to kind of, as much as you can, you still want to create models that can apply to, entire populations. But generally speaking, when you're looking to actually, find something actionable and get an edge on something, it does pay to kind of lock in to specific situations and not just kind of look at it like so bird's eye, like, oh yeah, these teams have the most miles and these teams have the least miles. And so, you know what I mean? It's like, it's very nuanced where, like, I think you said San Francisco was near the top of that list, but then San Francisco also has a lot of rest advantages, which is a lot more important, just given that they don't seem to have had those in the past. And then, there's also, we haven't talked about, like, I think turf issues for certain teams, and body type of the roster of the players at roster. We kind of got into that with the Chargers. So it's very nuanced and very unique. And for each team, you could kind of go through and kind of, the more you kind of dig into them, you kind of find the situations that you need to dig deeper into and kind of adjust for that team specifically, or look deeper into it because it applies to that team. So that's the way I would just go for anybody listening, going forward. And it's still a ways away, where we still got like 4 months before the season starts. You're going to be hearing a lot about a lot of different information. And it's getting harder and harder to kind of parse through what's important and what's not. So that's just something I wanted to kind of throw out there.
Well, that's a good little ending here to our pod, because we've gone a lot here. We've gone through a lot of information. We've talked about schedule, travel, all across the board. And we will be back soon to go over more bets and talk about all different types of stuff going forward into the offseason as we start to build our units and kind of figure out how we're going to be handicapping the season going forward. But I am Evan Abrams. That is Chris Raybon. This has been the Action Network podcast schedule release show. And thanks for tuning in, and see you guys soon.